So what's up guys, do a little video coming your way this afternoon. So I thought I would do a video today talking about raping Christopher Ingham. I mean he's someone I've spoken about a lot on my channel before. Obviously I've spoken a lot about, what he did and all that sort of thing. I mean at the end of the day, I'm always gonna believe that he did what he did, I don't think there's ever gonna come a time where I believe that he's innocent or that he didn't actually do anything. It's not that I don't want to believe that he's innocent. It's like I can't believe that he's innocent. I think for me, I feel like there's too much evidence that proves what he did. This is the thing. Like, there's not really any sort of evidence that proves that he didn't do anything, that he's innocent at the end of the day. Yeah, he'll say, that he's innocent, that's what they do. That's what they want people to believe. They want people to believe that he didn't do anything, but we all know that he did. I mean, Sussex police confirmed that he did what he did. Obviously, that he sent messages of a sexual nature. You know, I mean, obviously, it's his having to suffer, obviously, because of what he did. They can't go to Scotland. I mean, Scotland don't want them. And I'm sure you guys have probably seen about the posters, the posters about Chris not being wanted in Scotland. I'm sure Chris and Sarah probably probably seen them as well. I've probably heard about them. I can't see that Chris and Sarah are still completely unaware of these posters. I'm pretty sure they're probably fully aware of them now. By this point, by now, they're probably fully aware of it. They should be fully aware of them by now anyway. Um, it's funny. The other day I went back and I was watching the now infamous No Hell No video that he did, obviously, when he was basically denying all of the allegations and everything that had been made against him. When I go back and watch that video, there's one thing that stands out to me. Like, nothing he said in that video felt like the genuine truth. Like, it didn't feel like he was being genuinely honest. It felt like all of the words that he was saying, was from a script. It felt like that's what it felt like. When you go back and you watch that video, it just feels like he's reading from a script. Like, he's reading words that were written down on a piece of paper. You know, there's no, when you go back and you watch that video, there's no truth to any of the words that come out of his mouth. None of the words that come out of his mouth feel genuine. It all just feels like he's reading from the script, or like he's been told to say this. I often wonder if he was actually told to deny the allegation, to deny all of the allegations made against him, etc., etc. I mean, the other thing you notice with that video is like he not look at the hammer like at the hammer. That's how you know that Chris and Sarah and them are lying. They never look, but whenever they're talking, they never look straight at the cameras. Like, their eyes are all over the place, so they're lying. You know, Obviously, I don't think, as I said, I don't think there is anything that will ever convince me that he didn't do what he did. I think I'm always gonna be convinced that he did do what he did. There's nothing about that that screams innocent. The man, the man is a grade A child groomer. That's what he is, and that's what he did. That's what he'll always be. No matter how many times he tries to deny it, I for one will never believe a single word he says. He did what he did. We all know that he did what he did. Chris and Sarah know that he did what he did. Of course, they'll keep denying it, and they'll obviously always want people to believe that the allegations made against Chris weren't true. I'd love to see them go back to Florida, but I doubt that will ever happen because I don't think Chris would be brave enough to do that, considering what happened. You know, obviously we know that he'll never admit to what he did. We all know that that's what he needs to do. That he needs to hold his hands up and admit to what he did. But he'll never do that because he knows that him admitting what he did would destroy their channel completely, and they would never be able to show their faces on YouTube again if he admitted what he did. That would be it, game over for them. There and then. You know the the effect that would have would be catastrophic. The damage would be done if he admitted that. That would do lateral damage to their channel and to their reputations as well. I mean, you think about it, right? This is up until the early hours of the morning editing the vlogs, but is he just editing the vlogs? I don't believe he is. I don't think he's just editing the vlogs. I think he's doing a lot more than that. That's for sure. There's nothing about him that's ever screamed innocent. You know, he's always had that look of a guilty man. Even when he talks, he's out like a flipping creep. Everything about him says massive creep. He's got massive creep written all over. It's just unbelievable to say the very least. Like the situation is just ridiculous, like absolutely ridiculous. That I don't know what else to say. I honestly wish I did, but I don't. It's like, oh god, it's like, what is he doing? Like, how do people believe that he didn't do what he did? I mean, I'm so sick of hearing people say, "Oh, he's innocent until proven guilty." At the end of the day, Sussex police confirmed what he did. Sussex police confirmed he sent messages that were of a sexual nature. That is why people believe that he did what he did. The Sussex police said he sent messages that were of a sexual nature, and there's no denying that. You know, at the end of the day, he's a guilty man, and that will never change. You know, no matter how many times he tries to deny it, I for one will never believe. I believe the people who are the victims of creepy Christian. I don't believe him. I've never believed a word he says. Even when I don't, but even when I don't, when I go back and watch that No Hell No video again, I don't believe a word he says in that video. It didn't feel genuine. Every word he said in that video felt like he was just reading from a script. It felt like, as I said, it felt like he was just reading words that had been written down on a piece of paper. You know, there was nothing genuine about anything he said in that video. I've seen more genuine and more authentic apology videos from, on the platform, and that is I'm honoured. What I see in that video is a man who is basically lying and can't admit the truth. We know that he needs to, but he can't do that because he knows what would happen if he did. You know, I absolutely agree with the fact that he deserves to be held accountable for what he did. He will always deserve that. This is the thing, like, he did what he did, but he's never really been properly held accountable for it. And that is what people want at the end of the day. People want him to be properly held accountable for what he did. Because that's what he deserves at the end of the day. He deserves to be held fully, to be fully held accountable for what he did, and that's never and he's never been fully held accountable for it. He's never been punished for what he did. He's never faced any consequences for what he did. You know, it's just. As much as Chris is in the wrong, Sarah is just as bad. She's enabled him at the end of the day to do what he's done and do what he does. Do but having three, standing by her husband and having three kids by him after what he did, You know, any other woman would have their husband out of the house if he'd been accused of something like that. They wouldn't have stood by him after something like that, you know. But if you're Sarah Ingham, then of course you're gonna do that. Of course you're gonna stand by your rape of a husband after he was accused of something as serious as that. We all know that she shouldn't have stood by him, but there you go. That's Sarah Ingham for you. She's a fucking idiot. And we all know that. You know, it's actually hilarious that people think that that some people seem to think that Hassan is an innocent man. At the end of the day, no. I mean, if you have a single ounce of common sense, you wouldn't believe. You know, it's just it's just crazy that people think that he's innocent. That people think that he didn't do anything because we all know that he did. We all know that he's not as innocent as he's always been made out. There's a lot of people make him out to be completely innocent, and he ain't completely innocent. We all know that he did what he did. Chris and Sarah know that he did what he did. Yeah, they can't, but I mean, they know that he did what he did, but they just can't admit that. Chris knows that he did what he did. He just won't admit it, and he'll never do that because he hasn't, he hasn't got he hasn't got the decency to do that. Most people when they've done wrong, they actually have the decency to hold their hands up and admit what they did. But Hassan will never ever have the decency to do that. He will never ever have the decency to hold my hands up and admit, and hold his hands up and say, "Yeah, I did do that," and actually admit that the allegations made against him were in fact true, which we all know they're true. We all know that there isn't a single there isn't any, and that none of these allegations are false. You know, it's like, you know, anyone who believes that Chris is just a complete and utter numpty. Like, there's not really any denying that. How do people look at Chris and think that he's an innocent man? The guy's a fucking creep. And he's always had that look of a guilty man. For years now, I looked at him and said, thought, yeah, he's guilty. There's never ever really been a time where I've looked at Chris and gone, yeah, maybe, just maybe, he might be innocent. I've never thought that. And I don't think I ever will think that. I don't think I ever will look at Chris and think, maybe, just maybe, he might actually be innocent. Maybe, just maybe, all this time I've actually gotten it wrong. Maybe, just maybe, I was in the wrong for believing that these allegations were true. But I don't think I am in the wrong for believing that the allegations made against him are true. I don't think anybody's in the wrong. I don't think anybody is in the wrong for believing that the allegations made against Chris were true. Because I think we all know they're true. Because there is a lot of evidence that proves that the allegations made against him were true. This is the thing. The major point, the major thing about it here is that yes, there is evidence that proves that he did what he did. There isn't really any concrete evidence that proves he didn't do anything. I mean, let's face it. I mean, has he ever actually denied sending inappropriate messages? Because I know he denied being a nonce and all that kind of thing, but has he ever actually specifically denied sending inappropriate messages? I don't think Chris has ever actually denied that. He denied everything else. He denied being a pedo and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think as far as I'm aware of, I don't think he's ever actually denied sending messages that were of an inappropriate nature. I mean, obviously, you go back and you watch that video, you would at least think he'd actually show some evidence that proves he was innocent. But he didn't actually. I mean, he was saying, "Oh well, yeah, I'm innocent. Am I a pedo? No, hell no." But where is his evidence to prove that? Where is his evidence that proves that he didn't do anything? That proves that he's actually innocent. Where's his evidence that proves that the allegations made against him weren't true? He can say that the allegations made against him weren't true, but does he actually have evidence to prove that? does he have evidence that proves he didn't do anything? Because I don't think he does. I don't think he has any evidence whatsoever that proves that he didn't do anything and proves that he's actually 100% innocent, as he's always claimed that he is, which we all know that he's not. And people have always known that. People have always known that he's not innocent and that he did what he did. And yeah, if you're an I family, you may think that people are wrong for believing that that people are wrong for believing that Chris did what he did. But as I said, I don't think anyone's wrong for believing that. I think it's like you can't blame people for the fact that they blame people for that when there is evidence that proves what he did. Add to the add the fact that Sussex police did also confirm that he sent messages of a sexual nature. And so this is the thing, the Sussex police confirmed that. They confirmed that he sent messages of a sexual nature. So you've got to, adding that to the mix, it's like when you've got that information from Sussex police and Sussex police confirm that, how can you believe that someone is innocent when there's actually, when Sussex police confirm that they did send messages of a sexual nature? At the end of the day, Chris can deny all he wants, but I, as a lot of other people, will never believe it. We all know that he did what he did. We all know that he's not brave enough, or he doesn't have the decency to it. He'll never have the decency to admit what he did. He'll never have his hands up to hold. Actually, he'll never have the decency to hold his hands up and admit the truth, which is what he should do. He needs to hold his hands up and admit the truth. People will never stop talking about this. People will never stop talking about what he did and will never stop bringing it up. People won't stop talking about it until he actually admits what he did, until he holds his hands up and admits the truth. As I've said before in previous videos that I've done about this, I would be perfectly happy to stop talking about this once if he was to hold his hands up and actually admit the truth and actually admit what he did. Until he does that, until he holds his hands up and admits the truth, admits what he did, admits that the allegations made against him are true, admits that he slept with a fan, admits that he sent sexually inappropriate messages to teenage girls, I'm not going to stop talking about this. Because that we all know that he slept with he cheated on Sarah and slept with a fan. He sent sexually inappropriate messages to teenage girls. And Sarah stood by him after that. That is actually disgusting. She's just as bad as he is. The fact that she stood by him and had 3 more hits by that man. If that was any other woman, they would have thrown their husband out of the house. They would have thrown him straight out the door. If he'd been accused of something like that. No decent woman would stand by their partner, stand by their husband or whatever, who he was accused of something like that. You know, and I do feel, and it's kids I feel sorry for because obviously they have to deal with the consequences of that. It's that they're the ones that at the end of the day are suffering because of what he did. I think, I honestly, because I know that I think Isabel was bullied in school, wasn't she? And I kind of think that was probably a big part of the reason why she was being bullied. She was being bullied in school, as people had found out about what Chris did and were giving her a hard time because of that. People were kind of giving her grief because of what her dad did. You know, and I feel like that. In a way, I feel like the kids are always gonna get a lot of grief because of what their dad did. And everyone knows that Chris did what he did. Everyone knows that he should be held accountable for what he did. I know I'm not the only one that feels that way. I do think it's ridiculous that he's never been held accountable for what he did. I also think it's ridiculous that he was never banned from YouTube because we all know that he should have been permanently banned. as soon as it came out, as soon as the allegations against him came out. That should have been it. But of course, we know that YouTube don't really give a fuck about child safety, because if they, they wouldn't be allowing, they wouldn't have allowed people like Chris Ingham to continue uploading on the platform after the allegations that were made against him. And the serious, when you think about the serious nature of the allegations that were made against him, because these were pretty serious allegations. The allegations that were made against him were pretty serious, and probably did warrant him being permanently banned from the platform and not being allowed to continue posting on the platform. But it is what it is. We all know what he did. That he did what he did. I'm never not going to believe that. I believe that he did what he did. I'm never going to believe that he's innocent, because I just don't think he is. Whenever I look at Chris Ingham, the man, the man you're seeing, that you're seeing in the vlogs, the man that you're seeing, on camera, he doesn't look like an innocent man to me. He screams guilty, guilt. That's the thing. He screams guilty man. He really honestly does. You know, he has that face of pure guilt, like pure fucking evil. He has it. He's vile. He's disgusting. I mean, some of the things we've seen him coming out with in the plots recently, and some of the things we've seen him do, like he's doing, some of the things that we've seen him doing. I mean, look at the vlog the other week, like the other day when he was, with the ice cream and everything. Fucking creep. And you've also got proof of him behaving in an inappropriate way towards Isabel when she was a teenager, obviously ticking in her back, smelling her hair and wanted to sleep in her bed while she was away, hiding under her bed and jumping out on her, which was completely inappropriate at the time. And I still think it's really, and I thought that at the time, that it was really inappropriate, and I still think that, now. It's like, what sort of man? This is the thing, like, what sort of father would think it was appropriate to hide under his teenage daughter's bed and jump out on her when she should have been getting changed, or should have been undressed or anything like that. No decent father would think that was, that sort of behaviour was acceptable or appropriate. If I was Isabel's stepfather and I had actually seen this, and I had seen that her stepfather had been hiding under her bed and jumping out on her and things like that when she could have been getting changed and whatnot, I would have gone absolutely ballistic on that, over that. I would have done my nut on it. I would have done my nut over it. You know, I wouldn't have wanted that man around my kids when he's doing, especially a man that's doing things that thinks it's acceptable to do things like that. I don't think any decent father would think it was acceptable to hide under his teenage daughter's bed and jump out on her, when she was getting changed, or when she had been getting changed or whatnot. You know, we all know that Chris is a creep and Sarah is just as bad as him for sticking by. Simple as that. You know, we all know that he should hold his hands up and admit what he did, and admit the truth, but that's one thing that he will never do. You know, but going back and watching that No Hell No video, it's so mad. So like, it's just everything in that he said in that video felt so fake. It just felt so scripted, like he was actually probably reading from the script. The whole time it felt like he was reading words that he'd written down on a piece of paper. You know, it just felt like complete. It's probably one of the most diabolical videos I've ever seen. You know, it's just basically the video of him lying, saying he didn't do anything, which we all know he did. Obviously, as I said, they will always want people to believe the allegations against him weren't true. That's what they will always tell people, because that's what they want people to believe. They will never want people to believe that the allegations against him weren't true. I mean, we've all seen that the Radfords have been getting a little bit getting a little bit of backlash and whatnot, because of the fact that they've befriended the Inghams, and obviously they've getting a little bit about, they had the Inghams at the party and all that, and they met up with the Inghams at Centre Parks about 4 months ago, and you're asking that question of, and again, the Radfords obviously was that question of why would the Radfords want someone like, that want someone like Chris around it. It's, someone that has such a controversial reputation, someone that, did what Chris did. We all know that the Inghams probably told the Radfords that the allegations against them were, the allegations against Chris weren't true. Because that's what they want Sue and Noel to believe. They want Sue and Noel Radford to believe that the allegations weren't true. Which, if you're Sue and Noel, then you probably would be daft enough to believe that. But people seem to be overlooking the simple fact that it was Sussex police who confirmed that messages sent by Chris Ingham were of a sexual nature. That's a big point here that people are overlooking. People are overlooking overlooking that fact, that simple fact that the Sussex police confirmed that the messages sent by Chris Ingham were of a sexually inappropriate nature. And there's no denying that. There's no disputing that, and that was confirmed by Sussex police. You know, that's a big part. I think that's a big part of the reason, and the pretty main part of the reason why people believe that Chris did what he did, because Sussex police confirmed that. Sussex police confirmed that he said the messages sent by him were of a sexually inappropriate nature. And as far as I'm aware of, he's never actually specifically denied sending inappropriate messages. I mean he hasn't, has he? He's denied everything else, but he hasn't denied that. He's never actually denied that. And that's the thing here, he's never actually denied sending inappropriate messages. Sussex police confirmed that these messages were messages sent by him of a sexually inappropriate nature. I mean, I think people know what we're talking about, what people are talking about. I think he probably knows what people are talking about. If someone comments, drop that town and resend. I remember years, but like a few years back, I actually commented. I actually commented on one of Chris's Instagram posts and said, and I actually commented, drop that town, resend, and I got very quickly blocked, which I wasn't surprised, as obviously, if always on a net blog when you're saying drop that town and resend, Chris knows what people means. Chris knows what people mean when they say that. I mean, if you know, you know. But when people say, drop that town and resend, if you know, you know. Um, you know, as I said, if he admits what he did, if he admits to cheating on Sarah and sleeping with a fan, and admits to, grooming and sending sexually inappropriate messages to teenage girls, one who is around the same age as I think his daughter, Esme Meme is due to turn. I think she's due to turn 16 in June, and that was the age that one of his victims, at the age of one of his victims, was a 16-year-old girl. If he admitted that, I'd stop talking about it. Let's face it, Sarah, your husband, your husband cheated on you with a child groomer, and cheated on you with a fan, and slept with teenage girls. Your husband is a pervert, and he is a child groomer, Sarah, and that is a simple fact here. And we all know the allegations were true, no matter how many times, you and Chris tried to deny this. We all know the allegations are true. The iFan might be daft enough to believe the allegations weren't true, and might be another way to come out with he's innocent till proven guilty. But we all know he did what he did. Sussex police confirmed confirmed that messages sent by him of a sexually inappropriate nature. There's evidence out there that proves what he did. If the iFan showed me proof that he didn't do what he did, and that the allegations against him are not true, I will happily back off. I will never post another video about this ever again. If they can actually show me proof that he didn't do what he did. Until then, I'm not gonna stop talking about it until President himself holds his hands up and admits what he did and admits the truth, admits to cheating on his wife and sleeping with a fan and rooming and sending sexually inappropriate messages to teenage girls. These videos will continue. I will continue talking about this. But if he admits that, if he holds his hands up and admits the truth and admits what he did, I'll quite happily stop talking about it. I think a lot of other people will as well. But until then, people are not going to stop talking about it. People are not going to stop talking about it until he holds his hands up and admits what he did, and is held until he is held fully until he is actually held fully accountable for what he did. Because he's never been held accountable for what he did, and he needs to be. He needs to be held accountable for what he did. He needs to face the consequences for what he did to those girls, to those teenage girls. For what he did to them. If I was them, I'd go to the police and say that I want the case reopened. I want this case looked at again. And that's what I would do. You know, but yeah, I thought I would come on and do my thoughts on that this afternoon. Do a little kind of half an hour-ish video talking about that. And it's just really needed saying. You know, I, I won't keep doing videos like this until he admits what he did, until he holds out his hands up and admits the truth, and admits to sleeping with a fan, you know, obviously rooming and sending sexually inappropriate messages to teenage girls. He needs to be held accountable for what he's done, for what, in my honest opinion, he could still be doing. Because he could still be doing it, I don't think, it's obviously, we all know that a leopard never changes its spots. I certainly think that, he hasn't stopped doing it. I certainly think he could still be doing it. So as I said, he needs to be held fully accountable for what he's done and for what he could actually still be doing. You know. So yeah, I'll see you guys for another video tomorrow, and I hope you have, well, maybe there might be another one after in this evening, but I'll see what I'll see how I feel. I'll see what I can do. I'll see if I want to do one this night, if I have that desire to do another one this evening. If not, then there'll be another one tomorrow morning. But for now, have an awesome day, and I'll catch you later. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye bye.